The grave had her mother's name on it. The woman standing beside it was also her mother. 20-year-old Della Price had driven 4 hours to bury a woman and found her alive, standing in the cemetery, reading her own headstone. And when their eyes met across the wet grass, her mother did not look surprised. She looked like someone whose time had finally run out. And the story she told next was not about death at all. It was about the day Della was born, and why that day was the most dangerous secret in the county. Della Price learned that her mother had died on a Wednesday. She learned that her mother was alive on a Friday. The 47 hours between those two facts were the longest of her life. And she would spend a considerable portion of the years that followed trying to decide which piece of information had been more devastating. The Wednesday call came at 6:14 in the morning. Della was in her apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, a second-floor unit above a frame shop on Lexington Avenue that she shared with a woman named Carrie who worked nights at a hospital and therefore kept the apartment in a permanent state of considerate quiet. Della was awake, had been awake since 5, sitting at the small table by the window with a cup of coffee and a sketchbook, drawing the way the early light came through the fire escape. She was 20 years old. She had been in Asheville for 14 months, having arrived from the small mountain town of Grayson Creek, North Carolina, with a portfolio of drawings, a partial scholarship to a design program at a local arts college, and the specific relief of someone who has just walked out of a room where the air was bad and taken their first clean breath. The relief was real. It was also complicated, because the room she had walked out of was her mother's house. And the bad air in that room was not simple. It was layered and old and had a name, which was Ruth Price. And Ruth Price was the most complicated person Della had ever loved. Which is saying something, because Della had loved her completely, and without complications had become too structural to ignore. Before the complication, too structural to ignore. Ruth Price was a woman built from silences. She was a slight, dark-eyed woman who had raised Della alone in a 4-room house on the edge of Grayson Creek without ever explaining why Della had no father, no grandparents, no extended family of any kind, and no birth certificate that Della had ever been allowed to see. When Della was 7, she had asked about her father. Ruth had said, "He's gone." When Della was 12, she had asked about her grandparents. Ruth had said, "There's no one." When Della was 17, she had found a photograph. It was in a shoebox in Ruth's closet, which Della had been specifically and repeatedly told never to open. She had opened it anyway, because she was 17, and the shoebox had been in that closet for as long as she could remember, and she had finally run out of patience with deference. The photograph was of a woman who looked almost exactly like Ruth. Same slight frame, same dark eyes, same particular angle of the jaw, but younger, perhaps 25. Standing in front of a building Della didn't recognize, laughing at something out of frame. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting that was not Ruth's, Marsh, April 1982. Della had brought the photograph to Ruth. Ruth had taken it from her hand without a word, put it back in the shoebox, and placed the shoebox on a shelf Della couldn't reach. That evening at dinner, Ruth had said quietly and finally, "There are things in my life that are mine, Della, not yours. When I am gone, you may look at whatever you find. Until then, please respect what I'm asking." Della had respected it. She had resented respecting it. And when she left for Asheville at 18, she had carried both of those feelings with her, tangled together so completely she couldn't have separated them if she'd tried. She and Ruth had spoken on the phone every Sunday. The calls were warm and surface level and lasted approximately 25 minutes. They were, Della had come to understand, Ruth's version of love expressed within the boundaries of what Ruth could manage. She had accepted that. She was still working on accepting it when the Wednesday call came. The number was unfamiliar, a 828 area code, which was Western North Carolina, but not a number she recognized. Is this Della Price? The voice was female, middle-aged professional. Yes, Della said. My name is Sandra Hollis. I'm a nurse at Grayson Creek Medical Center. A pause, the kind of pause that contained its own information before the words arrived. I'm very sorry to tell you that your mother, Ruth Price, passed away this morning at 4:47 a.m. She was brought in by a neighbor 2 days ago. Cardiac event. She did not regain consciousness. Della set down her coffee cup. She did this carefully, the way you set things down when your hands have stopped receiving instructions properly. She didn't call me. Della said the words came out before she'd processed them. I'm sorry. She was brought in 2 days ago, Della said. She didn't call me. A brief, uncomfortable pause. I'm sorry, Miss Price. I don't have information about. It's fine, Della said. Thank you for calling. She ended the call. She sat at the table by the window and looked at the fire escape and the early light coming through it and the half-finished drawing of that same light in her sketchbook. Ruth had been in a hospital for 2 days and had not called her. Ruth had died without calling her. Della pressed her palm flat against the sketchbook and breathed carefully for a while. Then she called Carrie's number. Got voicemail, left a message explaining she needed to go home for a family matter, packed a bag, got in her car and drove west into the mountains toward Grayson Creek. The town of Grayson Creek sat in a narrow valley between 2 ridges of the Blue Ridge Mountains, approximately 2,100 feet above sea level, population 3,800. The kind of small mountain town that tourists found charming for a weekend, and residents found both suffocating and irreplaceable in the particular way of places that have shaped you, whether you consented to be shaped or not. Della had not been back in 14 months. The town looked exactly the same. The same hardware store on Main Street. The same diner with the hand-painted sign. The same Baptist church on the corner with the same message board out front, the letters slightly rearranged since last time. Ruth's house was on Birch Lane, a dead-end road at the edge of town where the residential lots gave way to forest. Della parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a moment. The house was dark, small, white clapboard siding. A front porch with 2 chairs that had sat in the same positions for as long as Della could remember. She let herself in with her key. The house smelled like Ruth. Pine cleaner, and the specific hand lotion Ruth had used her entire life, and something else underneath. Something that might have been the smell of a space that had been inhabited by one careful, private person for many years. Della went through the house slowly. She was not looking for anything specific. She understood, simply being in the last space her mother had existed in, which is something people do when they have lost someone and the loss has not yet become real in the body. She went to the bedroom. She stood in the doorway. The bed was made. Ruth had made the bed before she was taken to the hospital, or perhaps the morning before she was taken. Because Ruth Price had made her bed every morning of her life without exception, and this was the kind of detail that arrived in the chest like something physical. Della stood in the doorway of the bedroom. And then she looked at the shelf. The high shelf where Ruth had placed the shoebox 3 years ago. The shoebox was still there. When I am gone, you may look at whatever you find. Della got a chair from the kitchen. She climbed up. She took down the shoebox. She took the shoebox to the kitchen table. She made coffee because her hands needed something to do, and because Ruth had always made coffee at this table, and it felt like the right thing. Then she sat down and opened the box. The photograph of the woman named Marsh was still there. Della set it aside. Beneath it was a small collection of items, each one wrapped in tissue paper, with the careful preservation of someone who understood that paper and time did not cooperate without intervention. She unwrapped them one by one. A hospital bracelet, the kind they put on newborns. The ink was faded but Price. 04/14/2004, Della's birthday. April 14, 2004, she set it down and picked up the next item. A folded piece of paper, Soft at the creases from handling, she unfolded it. It was a birth certificate, not Della's birth certificate. The name on this certificate was Della on April 14, 2004. Grayson Creek, North Carolina, Carolina. Mother, Marsh John Voss. Father, Edward Callum Voss. Della read the document 3 times. Then she picked up the photograph of the woman named Marsh. She looked at the woman's dark eyes, her slight frame, the particular angle of her jaw. She looked at her own hands holding the photograph. She looked back at the woman in the photograph. She set everything down on the kitchen table very carefully. She drank her coffee. She sat in Ruth Price's kitchen for a long time. Then she looked at the shoebox again. There was one more item at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper. She unwrapped it. It was a key. Old brass, the kind that opened a safe deposit box, with a small tag, Ruth's handwriting. First National Bank, Grayson Creek. Box 114. For Della. Ask for Helen Marsh. She went to the bank the following morning. First National Bank of Grayson Creek was a small brick building on Main Street that had been in the same location since 1952. She asked for Helen Marsh. Helen Marsh was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses and the calm, unhurried competence of someone who had worked in the same institution for 30 years and had seen a considerable variety of human situations arrive at her desk. She looked at Della for a moment when Della told her Helen's expression. "Miss Price," she said. Or she stopped herself. Or, Della said. Helen looked at her steadily. "Your mother called me 2 weeks ago," Helen said. "She said you might be coming. She said to give you everything in the box and to tell you." She paused, precise about getting it right. "She said to tell you that she is sorry that she loved you first." "She loved me first," Della repeated. Those were her words. "My mother is dead," Della said. "She died Wednesday." Helen Marsh looked at Della for a long moment. "Ruth Price called this bank 2 weeks ago. She was alive when she called." "I know," Della said. "She died Wednesday." Helen nodded slowly. She led Della to the safe deposit room. She used her own key and the brass key from the shoebox to open box 114. Inside was a single large envelope, sealed with tape. Della's name on the front in Ruth's handwriting. And beneath the envelope, a smaller sealed envelope. On this one, in different handwriting, a handwriting Della did not recognize. "For my daughter. When she is ready." She read Ruth's letter in her car in the bank parking lot. It was 4 pages, handwritten. The penmanship careful in the way of someone who had thought a long time about what they were going to say and wanted the saying of it to be worthy of the thinking. "Della, if you are reading this, then I have run out of time to tell you in person, which I have been trying to summon the courage to do for 20 years and have failed at consistently. Courage was never my strongest quality. You got that from somewhere else. I need to tell you the truth now, and I am going to tell it plainly, because pretty words are what I used for 20 years to avoid the plain ones, and I think you deserve better than that. Your name is Della Ann Voss. Your mother's name is Marsh John Voss. She is alive. I know this because I have spoken to her every year on your birthday for 20 years. I need to explain how this happened, and I need you to try to hear it as the truth of a frightened 22-year-old woman, rather than as the decision of the woman you know, because they are different people and both of them loved you. I was a nurse at Grayson Creek Medical Center in 2004. On April 14th of that year, a young woman was brought into the emergency room in active labor, alone, with no identification and severe preeclampsia. She was 20 years old. Her name was Marsh Voss. The delivery was difficult. Marsh was unconscious for a significant portion of it. The baby was healthy. You were healthy. Marsh Voss was the daughter of Edward Voss Sr., who was at that time the county commissioner of Harding County and one of the most powerful men in this part of the state. Marsh had run away from her family 6 months earlier. She had been, I later learned, running from a situation in that family that I will not describe in detail here, except to say that it was dangerous, and that she had been running from it since she was 16. When Marsh was unconscious in the delivery room, a man arrived at the hospital. He said his name was Callum Voss. He was Marsh's older brother. He told the attending physician that the family had been looking for Marsh for months and that they were there to take her home. He also said something else. He said that the baby was to be taken as well. I was in the room. I heard him say it. I looked at that man and I looked at that baby, and something in me, something I cannot explain more precisely than that, said no. I took you. I am not going to minimize what that means legally and morally. I took a baby that was not mine from a hospital. I drove to Birch Lane and I put you in the house I had lived in alone since my own mother died. And I raised you. I called in a favor with a woman at the county records office who owed me a significant kindness, and I got you a birth certificate with my name on it, and I spent 20 years being your mother, which is the truest thing I have ever done, and the only thing I am entirely certain was right. Marsh Voss did not know where you were for 3 years. When she found out, she did not go to the police, because going to the police would have brought her family back into the situation, and her family was what she had run from. So she called me, and we made an arrangement. I would raise you here, safely, away from the Voss family. She would stay away, which was the safest thing she could do for you. And every year on your birthday, I would call her and tell her how you were. I would tell her about the drawings. I told her about the scholarship. I told her about Asheville. She cried every year. She asked if you were happy. I told her I was not lying. The envelope beneath this one is from her. She wrote it last year. She has been in Portland, Oregon for 11 years. She is safe. Her brother Callum died in 2019. Her father died in 2020 gone. She wants to know you. The decision is yours. The decision is Della. Everything about this has been unfair to you. I know that, but I loved you first, and I loved you completely. And I am sorry that love and truth did not arrive for you at the same time. They should have. You deserved both from the beginning. Ruth Della sat in the car in the bank parking lot for a long time. The Blue Ridge Mountains rose in every direction around the town of Grayson Creek, blue-gray in the morning light, enormous and indifferent in the way of things that have been present for longer than human trouble. She looked at the second envelope in her lap. For my daughter. When she is ready. She put it in her jacket pocket. She started the car. She had one more thing to do before she read it. The Grayson Creek Municipal Cemetery was on the eastern edge of town. 3 acres of maintained grass on a gentle slope, bordered by a low stone wall and 2 large oak trees that had been there longer than the town itself. Della did not know why she went there. Ruth was not there yet. The arrangements had not been made. She went because she needed to be outside, and because she needed to be somewhere that acknowledged, architecturally, that loss was real. She parked at the stone wall and walked in through the iron gate. The cemetery was quiet. A groundskeeper was working on the far side, near the oldest section of stones, but otherwise Della was alone with the gray morning and the damp grass and the sound of wind in the oak trees. She walked without direction. She had no family buried here. She had believed her whole life. No grandparents. No history. No roots in this ground. She was revising that understanding now with the specific exhaustion of someone who has received too much information in too short a time. She was walking along the newer section of the cemetery, reading names without intention when she stopped. The headstone was gray granite. Simple. Well-maintained. Ruth Eleanor Price, 1962. She loved well. Della stared at the stone. Ruth had died Wednesday. It was Friday morning. No one had had time to order a headstone. No one had had time to install a headstone. A headstone took weeks. She was looking at a headstone with Ruth's name on it and a death year of 2024. Pre-ordered. Ruth had ordered her own headstone ahead of time. Della stood in front of it and tried to determine what this meant, and found that she could not assemble the understanding quickly enough because something else was happening. She was not alone in front of the headstone. She was not alone in front of the headstone. She became aware of this gradually, the way you became aware in a quiet room that someone had entered without sound. She turned. A woman was standing 15 feet away, at the edge of the path, looking at the headstone. She was perhaps 40 years old, slight, dark-eyed, wearing a gray coat. She had Della's jaw, Della's hands, the particular angle of Della's shoulders. The woman looked up from the headstone. Their eyes met across the wet grass. The woman did not look surprised. She looked like someone whose time had finally run out. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The wind moved through the oak trees. The groundskeeper's equipment hummed distantly on the far side of the cemetery. "She called you," Della said finally. 3 weeks ago, low and careful. She said she was sick. She said it was time. I drove," the woman said. "I couldn't. I needed to drive." Della looked at her. "You're Marsh," Della said. The woman's face moved through something complex and quick. "Yes," she said. "You're my mother," Della said. The words sat in the air between them, neither of them quite knowing what to do with it. "Ruth was your mother," Marsh said. I'm not trying to take that from her. Or from you." "I know," Della said. She reached into her jacket pocket. She took out the envelope. "For my daughter. When she is ready." She held it out. Marsh looked at it. "She gave that to you?" "She left it for me," deposit box, along with the letter she wrote. "Did you read it?" Marsh asked. "The letter?" "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." Marsh looked at the headstone. At Ruth's name and the years of her life carved into gray granite. "She was a complicated woman," Marsh said quietly. "I know," Della said. "She was also," Marsh said, "the bravest person I have ever known." In her own particular way. Della looked at the headstone. She loved well. 3 words Ruth had chosen for herself. Not devoted mother or beloved friend. She loved well. Which was, Della thought, both a statement and a defense. An acknowledgement that the how of a thing mattered, that love without honesty was incomplete, and that Ruth had known this, and had spent 20 years trying to earn those 3 words anyway. "Can I read it here?" Marsh asked, looking at the envelope. "With you?" Della looked at the woman who had her jaw and her hands and had spent 20 years on the other end of a birthday phone call. "Yes," she said. They sat down together on the bench beside the path. In the gray morning, in the Grayson Creek Municipal Cemetery, and Marsh opened the envelope she had written a year ago to a daughter she had never met and read it aloud in a quiet, steady voice while the wind moved through the oak trees above Ruth Price's headstone. "To my daughter. I have written this letter 14 times. The previous 13 are in a shoebox in my apartment in Portland. I kept them all because I could not throw away any attempt to reach you, even the failed ones. I don't know what Ruth has told you. I don't know how much you know. I am going to write as if you know everything, because I think Ruth was, at her core, an honest woman who simply needed time, and I think by the time you read this, she will have given you the truth. My name is Marsh Jean Voss. I was born in Harding County, North Carolina, the second child of Edward and Catherine Voss. I will not tell you the details of what my childhood was like, except to say that I left at 16 and came back at 19 for reasons I am not proud of, and left again at 20, which is when I found myself in a hospital in Grayson Creek, alone giving birth to you. I was unconscious when my brother arrived. When I woke up, you were gone. I want you to know what happened in the next hour, because I think it matters. I looked for you, I got out of the hospital bed 2 hours after giving birth, and I walked the halls of that hospital looking for you, and I was removed the next morning, and I was told there was no record of a baby matching my description, and I went back every day for a week. I did not find you. I found Ruth 3 years later. It took me 3 years, and I will not tell you how I found her, because some of those methods were not legal. When I found her and understood what she had done and why she had done it, I made the hardest decision of my life. I let you stay. I let you stay because Ruth was giving you something I could not. Stability, safety, a town where no one named Voss had any power over you. I let you stay and I drove back to Portland and I built a life and I called Ruth every year on your birthday. She told me about the drawings. Della. She told me you drew the light, that you got up early to draw the way light came through windows. I want you to know that I do the same thing. I am a photographer. I have spent 20 years photographing light. I don't know what that means exactly. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. I am not asking you to call me mother. I am not asking you for anything. I am only asking you to know that you were looked for, that you were never abandoned, that the woman who raised you loved you in the most real way she knew how, and that I have loved you from a distance that nearly broke me every single year, and that I am here. If you want me to be. Marsh. When Marsh finished reading, the cemetery was very quiet. Della was looking at Ruth's headstone. She loved well. She told you about the drawings, Della said. Every year, Marsh said. For 20 years. Della looked at her hands in her lap, the hands that were the same as the hands holding the letter. Light, Della said. Light, Marsh said. They sat together on the bench in the gray morning for a long time. Two people who drew the same light from different windows beginning. Two people who drew then without rushing, slowly, and without rushing to be in the same room. The apartment in Asheville got a third occupant in September. Not a roommate exactly. Marsh Voss had rented the studio space above the frame shop, which the owner had been trying to let for 2 years, and set up her photography equipment in the good light that came through the south-facing windows. She was there 3 weeks out of every month. The 4th week she was in Portland, where she had a life of 20 years she was not abandoning but reconfiguring. The way you reconfigured a space when something new needed to fit inside it. Della and Marsh did not become mother and daughter overnight. They became first two people who drew the same light, who had the same jaw and the same hands and the same early morning restlessness that sent them both to windows before the rest of the world had decided to begin. They had difficult conversations. They had conversations that stalled halfway through and had to be resumed a week later with fresh patience on both sides. They had, occasionally, easy ones. Ruth's house on Birch Lane had been left to Della, which was the last practical act of a woman who had spent 20 years trying to make right what she had made complicated. Della had not sold it. She drove to Grayson Creek once a month. She sat at the kitchen table where Ruth had made coffee. She went to the cemetery and sat on the bench and was quiet for a while. She had decided, not going to sort out her feelings about Ruth Price into something simple and resolved. Ruth had done something wrong. Ruth had also done something that looked, from certain angles, in certain light, like the most desperate and complete expression of love Della had ever witnessed. Both of these things were true. She was learning to hold them both. On a Tuesday morning in April, her 21st birthday, Della was at the table by the Asheville window with her coffee and her sketchbook when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a Portland number, but not Marsh's number. She answered. "Is this Della Price? Is this Della Price?" A man's voice, older, careful. "Yes," she said. "My name is Thomas Voss," the voice said. "Edward Voss was my grandfather. I think you might be my cousin." Della set down her pencil. She looked at the light coming through the fire escape, the way it fell across the sketchbook in long, gold-edged bars. She thought about Ruth's letter. She thought about Marsh's letter. She thought about 20 years of birthday phone calls and a shoebox and a brass key and a headstone that had been waiting before the woman whose name was on it had finished living. She thought about the typing she had heard through a wall, about a door with 2 deadbolts, about a deed folded in a Bible. She thought about all the ways that truth moved through families. Underground and slow, like water finding its way through stone baptan, unstoppable, eventually arriving. Mr. Voss, she said, I think you might be right. She picked up her pencil. She kept drawing the light. Ruth Price spent 20 years protecting a child from the truth, and spending 20 years preparing to tell it. Sometimes love and courage don't arrive at the same time, but if the love is real enough, the courage follows. Eventually, if this story stayed with you, please hit the like button right now. Subbed and ring the notification bell. New story every week. And I want to know, has someone in your life ever loved you in a way that was complicated? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. See you in next video.